If you're kind of new to Hype, this might be a little fast. It might be a little overwhelming, but maybe it's something you can revisit. You'll see some cool techniques. I'm not going to bog you down with technical talk. I'm just going to show you a bunch of cool stuff you can do. Most of it without code, which I think is important. Mostly Hype features. So that's me. I'm the Director of Support. And sort of my relationship to how I understand how people use Hype is people coming to me with their issues. So I would much prefer to see your triumphs, but the way I understand, the way I teach people is through their pitfalls and issues they have. So, all right. So, what is responsive design? Here's the Boston Globe in 3 different sizes. It's a little more complex than squishing or squeezing. Probably some front-end engineers here who know there's media queries you can do, there's high-definition images you have to deal with. In Hype, it's pretty easy to use flexible layout to just switch between portrait and landscape, as Jake demonstrated. The majority of responsiveness you'll do will hopefully be in the width dimension. That's sort of how we understand the web. We scroll down. We don't really have a lot of full page experiences unless you control the app or you have full control over your dimensions. Height is something, like I mentioned, that you don't really do that often, but it's something you can do in Hype. And then this is sort of a magic bullet where you make one, it scales up and down. Great for images. It might kind of mess up your text where you have like extra large text on an iPad, but it is a magic bullet you can do in Hype that I will show you. And then unfixed, that just means that you don't care about the ratio of your images and you're okay with a little stretching and squeezing. And of course you can embed like a responsive document in WordPress, and we see this a lot where you're sort of working within a responsive theme in WordPress and you have to sort of contend with what's going on outside of Hype. You don't have full control over your HTML page. So I want to sort of lecture a little bit about how it's okay to remove features as you design for mobile. The desktop experience is great. Some people have those Surface Pros. You got a pen. You got, you understand. You have sort of a lot of control, but you really want to focus on what is the thing you're reducing your experience to. So minimize your animations. Even though Hype is an animation tool, we think it's absolutely great if you can remove animations from mobile. Some people get kind of dizzy if they're being shook around a little bit. So don't be afraid of that. And you definitely need to sort of instruct people a little more. On the desktop, you're sitting, you've got sort of your headspace right there. You need to guide people to your next action. But responsive is a little more than just width and height. You're talking about device DPI. You're sort of working with people who are in the boondocks and working with slow cellular connections. Are you favoring right-handers? This is sort of a rabbit hole you can get into, but it's good to keep in mind because you're really designing for people. So here's an example of a site made purely in Hype, and I've got Safari's responsive design mode to show off the iPhone layout. And you can see sort of what they do. They just sort of stack images. They've got that hamburger menu, and it's not a great deal of work to convert to your mobile layout. We've been seeing some cool things from Heroku. Here's a animation they made to describe the developer platform they made. And we weren't offended by this at all, but they completely removed their animation from mobile just because it's just too much information, and that's great. Do it. Remove it. but then here's something that does fit. Here's a mobile layout for another sort of thing they described using Hype. And they're sort of guiding you through it. You don't need to navigate, sort of understand this really complex topic just by sitting there and watching it. And of course, they have a wider layout. This just sort of fits in their documentation. So if you rotate, if you're an iPad or a desktop, this is what you see. And they have sort of a similar thing. Don't be afraid to just really, like I said, remove stuff. Don't make people dizzy. This is from Apple's Human Interface Guidelines, which are a really good read. It sort of helps you see behind the scenes of why Apple removes the things that they remove and how difficult it is to get that simplicity that we should all strive for, the rounded corners. And here's a great example of guiding that next action. So right here is in that lower right-hand corner is the mobile guidance for what you should click on. Maybe that should be a little bigger, but you really need to have, if you don't allow scrolling, you need to show what's next. Device sizes are kind of a nightmare. So if you think instead of where is it being held, is it in the lap of an iPad, is it desktop? You have to really sort of forget that there are 700 Galaxy products and just really focus on how it's being held. I'm really sorry that you have to think about that. So that's sort of the precursor to now I'm going to talk about specific Hype stuff. And the goal here is do a lot without knowing anything, which is, I think that's a great thing to go for. So we do have some things that you should think about as you set up your document. You always want to, I think, allow user scaling. You want to be able to let people double tap into a column of text to zoom it up. That's sort of just a nice thing to allow. We do give you that option to restrict it. And then we have special features for touch events. Web apps are sort of Apple's way of letting non-App Store apps onto the iPhone. They're sort of not a big a thing anymore, but we do give you some specific features for controlling that behavior. And then, the first thing you do, flexible layouts was the first feature that we created. Typically, back in, I guess, 2010, 11, you would create mobile layout, copy everything over, and then create your desktop layout. And you'd have two separate documents, and we would tell people, oh, just do this redirection script. You're going to detect, oh, is this an iPhone? Send them to this URL. So that was the old way of doing it, and now we have just this thing that says, all right, keep it 100% on the width, and you can see that's the code that we change. It's not technically complex on our end to do that. The tricky stuff really is the relationships that you can set for the elements. So this is definitely something that you'll want to play around with, but we hope it's intuitive. You pin items to its distance from the top, bottom, left. So that sort of keeps it 20 pixels from the left as you expand on your flexible layout. And then scaling is actually resizing elements. Let's say you have an image and you resize on the width and height. This setting here, stretch, is great for gradients or things that you don't have recognizable objects in. But if you're maintaining ratios, you're going to change that scale behavior to either shrink to fit or expand to fill. And I'll talk about zoom contents later, trust me. So here's a document that Michael made. And this shows off sort of those different pinning relationships in a flexible full screen document. So we've got scaling in the background gradient, because we don't care about recognizable objects. And then the stuff that's pinned to the bottom left, we see the pinning. This is a fun document to play around in with from our documentation, so go for that. I do want to encourage people to not do height scaling unless they really want to create lots of responsive layouts. If you want to really control your interface, you can totally do height and width scaling, but in most cases you're going to want people to scroll. But if you do control both dimensions, you have to show people what to do. This guy had his little gray circles. He's like, all right, to go to the right, you're going to swipe from right to left. So you need to show people what's next, or else they won't use your thing. So this is a great way to create background images that you really don't need to think too much about. You make an element, you set your background repeat to repeat on both dimensions, x and y, and then you can create something sort of like this, where you just scale it up and it repeats really quick and easy way. This was a site I made for a friend in an hour, and with just a little bit of pinning. This has no scaling, just pinning. You can do a lot of cool stuff, and the background image really helps you feel like you're taking care of a lot of different dimensions, resolutions. So one sort of pro workflow that is really useful in pinning is you group items. So in this really small graphic, you can see the Instagram and Facebook logos are in a group. But I have that group bounds set to sort of expand based on how I want it to move on the page. So as that page shrinks and grows, that relationship will be maintained. So the left edge will always be the same distance from the left edge of the group. So groups can get you really, really far with flexible layouts. And definitely work with layout grids. They will help you keep things focused. There's a lot of great websites that help you make these grids as well. There's, a lot of people use 12 column grids, and yeah. So yeah, when you are, another good thing you can do with groups is set scaling and masking effects. And I'm just going to skip this boring text and show you how that works. You can put a group behind your flexible layout, and then set that group's overflow to be hidden. So any cropping that occurs due to the flexible layout movement will sort of hide underneath your other layers. So it's a really neat way, if you're okay with cropping with your image. Some people aren't. So non-responsive layouts. There's a lot you can do with flexible layouts, and you can get what anyone would call a responsive website 80% of the way with flexible layouts. But if you want to go for smaller phone sizes, if you want to do anything a little more complex, you're going to want to turn on responsive layouts. This is a pro feature, so if you don't have pro, you might not see this option. So once you make your responsive layouts, it's super easy. We give you iPhone, iPad versions, and you can really quickly adjust that. So let's say your iPhone layout is coming in a little too small. You can adjust that breakpoint width. This is just like media queries if you know front-end web development. So most people will already do this, but it's really important to start with your complex, crazy, responsive, use every animation, go wild, maximalist layout, and then scale down from there. We'll use that large layout when you create your new responsive layout to make that a little easier for you. And we have some nice tools to make adjusting both animations and elements faster. So you can get the minimalist. And this is the moment when you should be deleting also. So here's a quick example. This is an animation for an iBooks page we made. So I'm doing this yesterday, making my quick iPhone layout. And this is how it looks on desktop. It's just a quick dragging a widget down and showing how it looks when you put it into iBooks. I'm going to group everything in my iPhone layout. Slide it to the area I want in my layout. And then now that I have it in a group, I can really quickly scale it down. Just hold Control, drag it down, and now it fits a little better. So for a lot of your animations, this is the workflow. You just make it a little smaller. So pretty easy, I hope. I feel like I would be wrong to not mention iBooks. Fortunately, there's nothing responsive you can do, but that's okay. You know, simple is better. You can't tell if you're using an iPhone. You can't tell if it's landscape or portrait. Luckily, the behavior is landscape, and that's all you got. So this is the magic bullet I mentioned earlier that lets you really quickly scale items up. Yeah, I'm sort of cutting out. One-handed operation here. Sorry about that. You guys deserve better. All right, so everyone can see in here. So here's a quick animation I made. This was from a political email from a certain candidate. I removed the faces, but remade it in height really quickly. And this is in a group and fully responsive. I didn't actually make any responsive layouts, but it just scales right up proportionally. And since everything is an element and sharp text, super simple. So the way this works is we have all of our elements here. It's just quick animations. I'm going to select everything, throw it in a group. You really need to be careful about how your group bounds are set, because that sort of defines how your elements scale. So once you have your group, switch over to the metrics inspector. You're going to scale it on both width and height and set your pinning. And then we're going to zoom and then shrink to fit. And that's it, except my group doesn't have content overflow hidden. That's the final piece that will sort of hide those edges. So that's the magic bullet. That can get you really, really far for responsive layouts. But yeah, once you get into those nitpicky details that bother you on the iPhone, maybe things will be too small. You'll want your text a little larger in certain layouts. That's where you'll want to break into responsive layouts. So symbols are sort of a scary thing in hype, I understand. But they're really powerful for responsive layouts. It helps you avoid replicating work you've already done. if you have something on multiple scenes, you probably want to use symbols. It's sort of a way of creating something once and letting that that single instance represent every element that every symbol instance where it appears. So just like you saw the scaling group thing I showed you, you can do this with symbols. So you can make a really large desktop symbol, scale that down for your iPad, responsive layout, and you just have to make one once. So it'll save you some time.
Excuse me, can you, stupid question, can
Yeah.
you define how the term symbol is being used here?
Yeah, we sort of borrowed from Flash's concept of a symbol where it is a sort of a movie clip, also is another term from Flash, where it's a animation that you make, you sort of encapsulate it as a singular item, and then you can create instances of that in multiple places. And then editing that symbol anywhere updates it everywhere where it appears. So this is a little extra info about scaling, and yeah, symbols are fun, but they can be kind of tricky. So just remember, when you're in a symbol, things are purple. When you're not, they're not purple. That's a little tip. Persistent symbols are great for the hovering items that you don't want to transition during your scene transition. So great for navigation, great for, let's say you have a footer that you always want stuck there. The way this works for responsive layouts is great because you can still do scaling and pinning and just sort of treat it like a regular element that's always there. So how do you test these sorts of things? You definitely want to jump into Safari and use Safari Design Mode as much as you can. I'll show you how to get to that if you haven't played around with it. First, you enable the developer menu because you're all developers now in Advanced. And then go to Develop, and then enter Responsive Design Mode. And then you've got a great interface to see exactly how it looks in different devices, landscape, portrait, everything. You even see huge screens. It's super helpful. You definitely also want to preview in as many browsers as you can. If you see a weird bug, check out the developer version of that browser. It might be fixed. And then you can thank the developer of that browser. This is a too small image to show you the iPhone sizes, but the only numbers you need to know is 320 through 415. This will sort of cover your bases. I typically tell people, don't worry about landscape. If your layout looks wrong on landscape, people will rotate the device, and you're fine. And of course, check out Hyperflect. As iOS updates and they update the underlying WebKit browser, we benefit from those web technologies because we're just throwing in a really powerful WebKit engine that sort of gives you a close enough representation of what mobile Safari will do when you load your device, load your document. You can also do sort of a responsive design mode thing that I showed you in Safari right in the iPad. So you can simulate an iPhone 6 or 6S or Plus. I would like to mention that we did this before Safari did their responsive design mode. And just bring on all your old iPads, get your iPad 1, get your iPad 2, and you can really quickly preview to as many as you want, really quickly. Now that there's split screen, also you can see if there's any differences between Hyperflect or mobile Safari. So you can look at different scenes while you look at, mirror mode, for example. Mirror mode is a powerful tool for, I should do a demo of that, but don't know if I can with one projector. With mirror mode, you flick a switch, and then any movement you make on your text in height is immediately shown on your device. So it's great for color reproduction, great for fonts. Fonts are always a little different, line heights are always a little different. So great to see a live representation. If you need to get into non-Mac browsers, I recommend BrowserStack. This does allow a local development option, so you could tunnel to your Hype, local server and load your document on Windows XP in a server farm somewhere. It's kind of insane, but if you really want to do testing, this is super helpful. This helps you keep your Galaxy Note really far away in server farms for the fire risk. Super helpful. And this is actually what you see. There's like a little plug that goes in and then it loads up a web page. Using SVG images is really a powerful way to both get responsive out of the box and to be nice to your cellular browsers who have really slow connections sometimes. An SVG can be like 10 lines of code compared to an image which is thousands. Highly recommend SVGs, go for it. If you see a little slowness on your mobile version, you should uncheck preload for your large images. You can sort in your resource library. You find your really large images, uncheck preload, and images as you visit their scenes, they'll be downloaded. So you don't need to prepare as much. So if you want to scale text, of course you can do that magic bullet system I showed you where you're scaling the contents of a group or scaling a text element. But there's also all of the wild world of CSS you can leverage. There's a really interesting CSS size you can use, which is a relative size called a viewport width. And let's say if you set a header to be 7.7 VW, that's actually a relative value based on the current viewport width you're working with. Give you a quick demo of how that works. It's kind of cool to do it without any code. Well, 2 lines of code. So what I'm doing here is I have my header. This is my page of text. And I set a class name, H1. You could make this anything you want, but then you match it up in your head HTML. And this is what's written out when you export your HTML file. So I'm in a set that's really illegible, but that says 7.7 VW. And what that does is it scales that header based on the size of my viewport width. And I have that set on my paragraph text as well. And it does a pretty good job of keeping lines honest to how they are on every single viewport. It's close, but it could be better. So that's one more thing in your toolkit for responsive layouts with text. Don't see that too much, but I would like to. Here are a couple great tools for planning your text layouts. Typography is a huge world that is way over my head, so I like to trust the experts. They've got their golden ratios, they've got their relationships between headers and paragraph text, and it's important to adhere to a couple rules as you go. Here's another good one, Typescale. That early one was Gridlover. And that's it. There's way more you can do with Hype that I didn't show you. But there's an amazing community of responsive layout hackers who are both doing weird JavaScript techniques. They're using transforms. They're taking Hype to new levels. And you'll find them in our forums. They're crazy, crazy awesome people.